All right, let's talk about Milo of Croton, or Milo in the Bull, the father of progressive overload. Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I thought I would tell this story for you guys and gals. Now, this is not actually considered to be a story per se because this is somewhat documented history. But it's always interesting, and it's one of those stories that I like to retell. And no matter how many times I do a video on it, I get people who chime in. I love the story of Milo and the Bull. Could you retell it? It's like kids sometimes on the channel. So here we go. So the story of Milo of Croton was in Croton in ancient Greece over 2,000 years ago. And this, keep in mind the time period. The ancient Greeks had studied a lot of stuff. They had philosophy. They invented a lot of mathematics. The Pythagorean theorem, all sorts of equations. And again, these were very educated people. Again, the Greek philosophers have still carried over into today. We still read their writings. They also cared a lot about physical training, the physical body, aesthetics of the body, athleticism. This is also where we get the Olympic Games from, right? Mount Olympus. This comes from ancient Greece, right? It literally comes from ancient Greece. So the story of Milo was a famous wrestler and strongman, and at the time he was considered to be the strongest man in the world. And many people for generations considered him to have been the strongest man in the world ever. And it very well may have been the case as far as any documentation goes. But one of the things that he was famous for was his ability to pick up and lift a grown bull. Okay? So what Milo had done, though, to be able to do this, he had noticed in his own training, and I suppose he had talked with other philosophers and people who knew about these things, and he realized that the body adapted over time. As long as you made small changes to the workloads that you subjected it to, our bodies adapt, right? They adapt. They improve if they're able to handle very, very small changes. This is why we tell people we don't make huge changes in our training or our exercise. You don't try to add 30% more work overnight. We don't do this. It's silly. But what he did, he speculated that if he took a baby bull and he carried it, okay, and he carried it every single day as it grew, he would be able to pace the strength with it. Now, this comes up, and every time I do this, people say, no, there were much bigger bulls there. No, there weren't. This has actually been researched by experts who've looked at it, and yeah, the bulls were not like we think of as modern selectively bred bulls, that we have in the modern world. In ancient Greece at the time, bulls only got up to about 400 pounds. Now, that being said, 400 pounds is not an unimpressive weight to lift and carry around. So just for context, this is still no small feat, especially considering they didn't have any PEDs. They didn't have necessarily the modern food, maybe always all the protein and everything that we have, right? They didn't always have these things. Didn't have the best medical care. So again, harder times. So he didn't have any of these advantages. But what Milo did, he got up every morning, squatted under this bull the same way you see, goat herders sometimes carry a goat across their shoulders, right? He squatted this bull up over his shoulders, this little calf, and carried it every day. And he carried it around through the town, right? He walked pretty long distances with it. So he did this day in and day out. Every day he got up and picked up this bull and carried it around. Well, as you can imagine, over time, this bull grew. And it grew, and it grew. And this became quite a spectacle, as you could imagine. People came from long distances to come see Milo, because Milo was already well known. Like it's not like this is what made him famous. He was already like a champion wrestler. Like he was already known as this great wrestler and this extremely strong person. So it's not like he didn't have some fame already and wasn't already known. His name was out there. So when he started doing this almost circus act, people came to see. And they wanted to see. It's not every day you see a man carrying a bull around on his shoulders, even a calf. But as it grew, this bull became a fully grown bull within, 2 or 3 years. And because it was used to him doing this, it probably wasn't aggressive with him because it had been carried by him every day since it was a calf. It just became part of its normal life, no big deal to it. So when people would show up and he would come to a spectacle for leaders and kings and philosophers and wealthy merchants, all these people would travel. And it was documented. Like, it was noted by historians of the era that Milo had picked up this bull. And even the methods he used to do it were discussed, of how he carried it every single day. And so what happened is people showed up and they saw it. It was documented. And he became so famous for it that still to this day, the story of Milo and the bull is still told. Right? It's still told. We continue to tell it to this day. That's how famous he was. And so, again, this is the story of Milo. But what does this tell us? It tells us what we know still in the modern world. The whole concept of progressive overload is an intrinsic part of exercise science, and it's an intrinsic part of strength training. And we know even for hypertrophy. Here in the modern world, we know that progressive overload and progressive tension, meaning continuing to add workload to recruit and fatigue the highest threshold muscle fibers, is really the only way to sustain muscle growth over years. Okay? It's really the only method that will work for years on end. Everything else tends to be somewhat fleeting. There's other things we can do temporarily, but they won't be consistent. Progressive overload is. Just in getting bigger, getting jacked. But it all went back to the story of Milo, because this was where it was documented. This is where historians and philosophers of the time, again, many of whom cared about athleticism. Keep in mind things like Aristotle said about that, right? They valued the physical body, the strength, the athleticism, the aesthetics. It was part of their philosophy. It was a time period where intellectuals were athletes and considered it all to be important. Mind and body as one. But it goes back to that. The story of Milo and the bull gave us the modern concepts today of progressive overload, and we have displayed it for centuries. It's been shown repeatedly that it still works. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative and that you enjoyed the story, and I will talk to you guys and gals next.